I'm really happy to introduce Diogo Pimenta, who is a future faculty of the Masters in Drawing program at PCA. So you'll get to know a bit about his work. I've got my instructions for Veronique, who has a sore throat, so I'm going to read the introduction here. Diogo lives and works in London. He studied sculpture in Portugal at the International Centre of Sculpture in Pinheiro, and the Baltic Art Centre in Gotland in Sweden. He then studied at the Art Centre for Visual Arts in Lisbon. He's particularly interested in drawing as a genre that he puts in action, and whose status he enriches by raising a sensitive experience. However, he's not a draftsman in the classical sense, meaning of the term. His experiments more than he draws, using iconic materials like graphite, dust and paper. Even though his works are often monochromatic, the surface of the paper or of the wall become a delicate, albeit metallic texture. The artist allows the drawing techniques to go beyond its traditional confines and expand in multiple shapes. The realizing process at the heart of his creation abolishes the boundary between drawing, sculpture and performance. I think that's going to interest a lot of people here.
Really?
He is a member of the contemporary drawing magazine Roven. He's represented by the gallery Until Then in Paris, Gallery Cristina Guerra in Lisbon, and Zach Branica in Berlin. And he just finished a residency in New York, Residency Unlimited. Diogo exhibits all over the world in numerous prestigious art centres, museums and galleries. And here are some recent solo exhibitions. Actually, this is an edit from a very long list, a very impressive list.
Not that long.
At the Museum Grau Vasco in Portugal, the Irish Museum of Modern Art in Dublin, the Museum of Contemporary Art Colegao, Antonio
Collection. Antonio
Pessoa in Portugal, thank you. With Portuguese I have problem with pronunciation. At Cristina Guerra Gallery in Lisbon, Gallery Schneiderlang in Berlin, Until Then, and Yvon Lambert in Paris, La Ferme du Buisson at Noisy-le-Sec, just to mention a few, and some group exhibitions at the Triennale of Architecture in Guimarães, Portugal, Sarah Laves. Your language is getting. I'm not that bad, sorry. I'm trying to do it very beautifully. I can do the French. The Centre d'Art à la Panacée in Montpellier, Centre Pompidou. And his work is part of important collections including the Collection Lambert, Centre Georges Pompidou, Fondation Nationale d'Art Contemporain, Centre National d'Art Contemporain, Tadeusz Ropak, Pomeranz collection in Vienna, and then the list continues. I'll hand this. Actually, you don't have to use this.
Yes, I have my
Thank
device.
You very much.
Thank you so much for this presentation, for the effort in Portuguese as well.
That was terrible.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for inviting me, and also to Veronique for having me here. I see this set and the videos, and it's supposed to be an informal presentation as well, so feel free to ask any question, even during the presentation, there won't be a problem. I brought you some images around the work, also a few little versions of some of the video work as well. But it's also important for me to come here and talk a little bit about how it happens, where did it start? I have this question a lot. People ask me where is the beginning of that, the inspiration. I always try to kind of avoid the questions, trying to go around it and never really answering it. Today I'm going to try to pinpoint a few moments. It's kind of a construction, an important construction. It could probably be another one tomorrow, but these ones are really pinpointing the main kind of moments for these kind of beginnings for the works, somehow some inspiration even before my art studies. I think they are also important, although we don't pay too much attention sometimes to those moments really before the studies. Becoming an artist, consciously becoming an artist, I think my work kind of refers to these moments a little bit more back, and experiences a little bit more back in time. I also on the Eurostar I wrote a few notes. I think I will relate to them also. I think we were talking about the beginnings, and I think it's important to kind of mention the myths of the origin of drawing. Don't worry, it's not going to be an art historian lecture at all, but it's really moments that were important for me. There is, and if you would need much more time, because I'm referring to Pliny. You probably know about one of the myths of the origin of drawing comes from this text that Pliny wrote. I think it was at the 77 AD, year 77 AD, and he wrote this book called Natural History, and he wrote a lot of things in this book. It's a book made of books. So what interests me is book 10, I think, and 36. But I'm going to talk to you about this first myth that he refers to in this book. He talks about the story. In fact, in the book also he's mentioning, talks about painting also at some point. There was the moment where it really took my attention. Painting, but he also involves minerals, pigments, and it's funny because we think that this questioning of painting that we have today or recently is something recent. It was not. It was Pliny already considered painting also on a way that it was kind of obsolete or something from the past. So it's interesting that he already, the year 77 AD, talking about painting in these terms. This issue doesn't really, it's not our issue, it's not my issue, the validity or not of painting. What interests me is this kind of fluid passage between this kind of practice, the practice of painting, drawing, and sculpture. And it's interesting because when he mentions this myth, it's kind of a moment where he first talks about painting, and then from painting he kind of goes to sculpture. This is the beginning of the chapter where he's going to start talking about sculpture. But he mentions kind of this idea of a beginning of the history of the myth of the origin of drawing. This myth, it's a story. It comes with a story. It's a woman that is at home, and her husband is going to go away for a long trip, and what she does is she draws his silhouette on a wall. I think it's in the first approach I felt it was kind of a drawing of an absence. The husband's going away, she needs to grasp something, at least like a silhouette, and that's the one of the stories where we feel that there was kind of a drawing that was meant to being mentioned to it. It was important to talk about. And this en fait, this drawing, en fait, the France being in France, and it's this drawing, in fact, is something that it's talked about in books a lot. It's referred by a few artists as well. But what I think it's important for us here is also to know that it's her father, and we don't mention this often, and it's kind of the moment where my practice kind of identifies, or it goes on with it, is that the father was a ceramist, and he did terracottas, and from this silhouette he came from the bidimensional object, the drawing on the wall, to become a sculpture, and then he did terracotta from it. What I like to show you in this kind of myth of the drawing is also from a drawing that it came from an object, a person, kind of absence. It becomes something that it's tangible. It becomes something that it's also kind of we can reproduce it. We can reproduce this drawing. The silhouette could be different terracottas. That's one of the moments that I wanted to bring in to you. Another myth that he was kind of talking about around the origin of drawing is this apelles and protogenes. It was also painters, but we go back a little bit back in time. Here we're talking about the 300 before Christ, and this apelles went to the master's studio, and then he knocked at the door, and there was this caretaker of the house who receives him and says, "Oh, sorry, the master is not here." And Apelles decided to make a sign, make the master know that he was there. So what he did was with a brush, he did a brush stroke, a line on a piece of canvas that the master had there. And then next day he came to see if the master was there, and what happened was the master was not there anymore again, and then the master drew over the Apelles line, a thinner line over that line. So this is really another moment that I think was really important for drawing, and I think to understand drawing the way I kind of perceive it. But Apelles, from there, he drew another line over the line of the master. So a third line was drawn again. I like to I think it's important to make this kind of exercise, although it's not the same thing, but Lucio Fontana, the Italian artist who came with a blade and cut the canvas. It's funny to imagine that he did a very slight cut. I like to think, I always imagine how would this story be transposed to this cut on the canvas, and how would another cut over this cut. Of course it's impossible because the canvas is already cut, but how can we go over this cut again? And it's just an exercise that I would like you to think about it at the moment. Before going to the images, first check if everything is really working. It's natural history for Pliny. Pliny, yes. Yeah, you will find it, natural history. The book I'm referring to is the book 36. It's so big, it's so long, it's such a long book that it's hard to grasp. So it would be an enter. And this idea of reproduction also, this idea of the drawing is also the possibility of a reproduction. The drawing that the wife makes also it kind of to mark kind of an absence. I think it's more about grasping something. It's kind of a movement. This drawing can be repeated. There is kind of a movement. There is also in Renaissance Raphael who drew under the drawings. There is kind of an underdrawing made by dots that you could kind of reproduce. When we see Raphael's drawing, we have this idea of there is kind of it's original, but it's also behind the original. There are this kind of possibility of reproduction, and I think it's really important to understand this kind of approach the way I see it. I'm going to probably first, I see that images, we have them here. relate to my notes. Hopefully I'll be able to see them in here. So getting to my owning experiences, when I was younger, I used to, the ocean was really important. I lived near the sea, and jumping from cliffs was something that I did as a regular practice. And there was this moment when I was on top of the cliff, sometimes 30 meters high, is that you have to throw a little stone to measure, because you're such a distance from the ocean that you see it, but you don't really know. The sea is flat, so you really need to kind of measure this distance. So I threw a rock, a little stone, to kind of measure the distance. Then the jump is no longer important, because the jump is made when you throw this rock, and the rock goes all this way, kind of measuring time. You also, there is a distance that you have to perceive, your body perceives it. It's kind of a projection also of the jump in a way. You can jump there, you have those measurements. The jump is half made because you know the distance, but you also perceive the gravity, how the gravity will pull you. So all these kind of elements of distance and measuring, it was really important for me. There is kind of this possibility of drawing. The possibility of drawing, or the possibility of the jump, it comes before it. It has to be measured, it has to be lived in a way, and kind of projected. It's really important. There is Nietzsche said that there is no way to be more than ourselves if we don't surpass ourselves, and if we don't get out of ourselves. I think it's really important, this notion of the projection of our body, of our gestures. It has to be made outside ourselves. There is this very nice piece, I don't know if you know Bruce Nauman, I think from the 60s, and Bruce Nauman did this piece from the mouth to the arm, and it's only a sculpture where he represents his mouth from here down. There's no eyes, I think barely the nose probably, and then it comes from his arm, and it finishes in his hand. So it's just that on the wall. Although it is a sculpture, I think it really is connected to gesture, to drawing itself. It's almost pornographic, this kind of piece that we almost couldn't relate to, because it's his mouth, it goes through his neck, it's very specific, because it's really a cast, it's only a cast. There's kind of this strange color, we can relate with flesh as well. You see the elbow, and you go to the hand. It's something that we could almost not relate to somehow, because it's so personal, but strangely it's also a piece that it's really, there's a lot of reproductions of this piece. A lot of artists and even designers, they kind of used this piece to make other works, because it is something that comes from the inside, his own body, his own experience, but that is all, like I told you, really personal, but it's also something that it comes, it gets to us. If you see, there are very, very strange reprises of this piece that are completely strange, although it's a clear reference and assumed as one. So, yes, I also mentioned here, I'd like to talk to you about this, also the piece of Gordon Matta Clark, referring also to this experience of drawing, and Bruce Nauman also, it's something that when you see the work, where he cannot predict, and there is kind of element of danger. Gordon Matt Clark, I don't know if you know his work, he cuts. It's an artist that worked in the 70s as well, and like Bruce Nauman, and he cuts buildings, he makes holes on the storage of buildings, and it's kind of a very dangerous work. It draws kind of circles and spirals inside buildings, and also this idea of being inside a building, and then it deconstructs. There's kind of this danger of collapsing. One of the houses he intervened in was just a very small kind of triangular cut where the house kind of opens into two. This is real size work. He really goes there with a saw, and he makes all these kind of works. After these works, he kind of used also what he extracted and brought to the exhibition. But for me, and more connected, I think, also to my practice, is this idea of the cutting a space, getting inside a space, measuring, this idea of also kind of idea of collapsing and not being kind of a reference. This work is not a reference for an engineer. I think they did it to be solid, and this artist, Gordon Matt, is really approaching the building in a way that it kind of makes it almost collapse. I'm bringing you these two references. They are important. There are a few others, of course, many others, but I think I've always considered my work as kind of a referential. Mostly in the beginning, there was really no reference to other artists. I've worked with an artist when I left school as an assistant for a few years. He had a disease that his movements were not as they were, so he needed some help. And it's funny because it was kind of an important artist in Lisbon, in Portugal, and internationally. He studied in London also for a little while, but I didn't know him when I arrived to his studio, and it's funny because there were a lot of connections, also this idea of kind of the approach to monochrome, but mostly in my practice there is this idea of this element of not a referential. It's really important kind of having this space of one's own. That it's, to me, it's really important that it's present. And for example, there is a kind of a reference. There was also might explain it, and going completely opposite to art. There is this Rodney Moore. I don't know if you know him. It's an excellent skateboarder, and the story we're bringing here is not about skateboard. It's about he was a professional in America, and he, in fact, his father didn't really like the idea of him becoming a pro skateboarder. What he did was he completely took him out of the competitions where he was being first every time, and he took him home back in the country, and where he had no access to magazines, to references, and what he asked his father so much and so intensely that he really wanted to, and he felt miserable. His father understood that he felt miserable. So what the father decided to do, instead of sending him back to competition, was to build a concrete slate in the garden. He had a lot of money, and he had the possibility of building a very kind of sophisticated slate, and it was built slowly. First there was the slate, and then there was the heater, and then it was raining, so he needed another construction. And so these kids only skated there without any other references. There was a moment where he kind of grew up, and the father also kind of understood that he was doing it every day, probably 9 hours or more a day, so he understood. So what happened was that when he arrived back to the competition, he brought a completely different approach to the practice itself. So it was really important to how can we stay present, stay in the moment, cut with the references also at the same point, being with ourselves, but having something that it's going to be kind of valuable outside when we bring it outside. For me, this was kind of an important also reference. We're going to go to the images at some point, I promise. Yes, something I wanted to talk to you about was about also with all these kind of myths of origin of drawing that really talked to what I was doing in a way, probably in a very personal way. I think I've kind of at some moment I have this my own myths, my own moments of kind of myth of the origin of drawing. It was not really in the origin, it was a little bit later, but it was this little story. My son was afraid to go from the bed to the light switch, so he couldn't really cross that distance. It was long and he was really scared to cross the void of the dark, and we were a little bit worried. He was worried himself as well. We wanted to try to find a solution, and the next day, in fact, he found a solution before we even realized. And he did. I would go to his room. There was this very strange kind of parkour. There was kind of a line that went from his bed to the light switch, and the objects were really almost in a strange, perfect line that crossed all the way to the light switch, and the objects were very strange, were quite random to me. When I looked, you could find a dinosaur, a cube, different objects, even a pen, or multiple objects that he had with him. I don't think he would go and search an object from elsewhere. It was probably something that was really there, close to him, and that meant something. There was no fiction about it. There was no, I don't think there was a relation from the cube to the dinosaur to a piece of tissue also, or a sock, or even a shoe. But they were all kind of related to him. And to my approach of drawing, I think this was for me the kind of my myth, the kind of origin of drawing, was something that was really important, that defined the way I also approach it today, even today. And it's this idea of, it was not about the line, it's about the distance that you have to cross. And the next day he was no longer scared. And when I told him we're going to keep the objects, they were no longer there, he said, "Oh no, I already took them, I don't really need them anymore." And from that day on, he could cross it. I don't think it's a story about the fear of crossing something or going through. It's more about this idea of how do we build the distance between what we really want, what we need, what we are searching for. And he wanted to leave the room, he couldn't, so he created this kind of space, and finally it was good. For me, it really defines kind of an approach to drawing, although we're talking also about objects. I'm going to show you a few images, although it is an extensive PDF. Checking time as well. Screen. I'm going to try and move them. So here we have two panels. It's wooden panels prepared with gesso. I brought you this piece because for me it was really important that you would understand kind of a dimension of the work, although it's not only the only dimension. there is a line drawing. We can really, I'm really sad that we can really perceive it, but it's line drawing, black line drawing on the right panel that measures probably 180, 170. And then the next panel, it's gessoed, and when it was in my studio, I told the transporters to touch the black one, the drawing that was not fixed, and then bring it, and they said, we're gonna ruin the white one if we don't clean our hands, and I said, no problem, that's exactly what I want. So when you went to the exhibition, it went exactly like that, and we can even see somehow at some moments the hands of the transporters. So people were invited to draw with their fingers to draw from one surface to another. This was in the beginning, and this kind of explains the photographer decided to put himself in the scene to explain it, and I usually don't show this image. I think it's important to show it to you here today, and you can see that it goes to from the black panel to the white panel, and it was funny. It was also kind of, it's a piece that it can be shown in different places. It will always be different. There was this kind of language that was the first instinct of people, but then suddenly the language becomes kind of an abstraction also. It comes closer to kind of this idea of cacophony and kind of construction, and it becomes also kind of a monochromatic. This was at the middle of the show. I don't have the last picture with me, where it gets really dark, the image, and the possibility of kind of information, it vanishes. This is another image. This was also another work. It's kind of a device. It's a table, but there is a pencil and a white piece of paper. When you draw on it, there was you have this idea, what am I going to draw, and you're alone in an exhibition space, so you can draw whatever you want. Sometimes for the artists it's quite dangerous, and so people decided to, let's say, to draw a little house, and when they drew the little house, there was a sound. There was the phonetic sound of the ABCD that came out of it, because there is a device under that identifies the pencil, the movement of the pencil, and then it comes all the phonetic sounds for the alphabet, like this idea of also kind of the beginning of kind of language. At some point I spent so much time with it that I could say my name on a phonetic sound with another voice. I could go Diogo. I could really talk, of course, slowly. Was discovering. There was also a draw, and people would have to switch their kind of mind and brain to decide, am I drawing? Am I listening to the sound? Am I building some? So it brought for me this idea of kind of drawing closer to language, at the same time really kind of questioning them. And these drawings are work in progress, and it's always installed when there are dents or somebody just decides to take them out and install them in the space. There was a little video made by an assistant at the gallery. Oops, I think we lost everything. It's here. Just to give you an idea. They've sent me this after the show. It's not the best quality. So,
Press your finger, does this, or it's only when you're drawing?
what do you mean here?
No, on the table.
Oh.
Just put your hand.
If you put your hand, it would also work. It's the pressure. Yes, it's on the pressure. You could not draw anything and use it as almost like a digital. It's funny that you the pencil was there, so it was kind of obvious. Nobody ever, but it's interesting that this idea of the digital also, that how we are also connected to our devices by this kind of digital interface. No, it just disappeared. The folder just poofed. Maybe I should. Yeah, what I did was I put play on the movie and then it just left, right? So is there any... I can open them again.
Yeah, I thought maybe you moved the screen, like...
Huh.
No? Huh.
I don't think so. We can open them again. We won't take that file open that long.
It's weird.
It's gonna that's strange, right?
Yeah.
And now it opened.
Oh.
And now it's no longer open.
It's a different screen. Yeah.
Oh, it was on a different screen then. So Photoshop we don't need. And let's say yeah, completely.
Here and hit.
That's the thing
You
when
could
we don't
find
have
it?
your computer. Yeah, it's true that sometimes.
So it's this one.
So how did you get to there?
I hit this. Button right
Okay,
here.
great.
Like
As
that.
simple as that.
Yeah.
So it would be perfect. Great. So in these drawings are blind drawings. There are drawings that we're going to go fast on some of the works and then coming back to others or stay. But if I go too fast at some point, you can always, if there's a piece that you want to talk about, please stop me. And it's blind drawings. It's drawings that are almost like these kind of documents or kind of blind documents. They look like documents on the wall. At the same time, they are kind of this roundy because they're round and installed like that also because they were made on a kind of a tube, a cardboard tube, and they were kind of shaken. They're inside with graphite stuck inside. It's covered, and it's on this kind of round shape. And I just listen to it, and I just draw it on both sides. So I take it off, and then I put it inside again, and it's this kind of moment where I'm really trying to define the end of this drawing, and the end of this drawing is always a moment of kind of exhaustion and kind of trying to project inside the drawing itself. They're installed like this, and it's blind drawings because it's really this idea of that you can't really see them. This is made kind of the same process. This is they are installed in line here. They make at least 4 meters high, so that you perceive a little bit the kind of the size of the shape, and it's also. Then again, another device where these drawings, I perform them. I first show them as they are shown in here, but there is kind of it's covered. The graphite is inside. It's the square kind of screen, and then the circle is protected. There is graphite inside, and it's these kind of movements that make the drawing that don't really correspond to the drawing itself at the end. They were really important in a kind of there was kind of a turning point for me where I really found a moment in the drawing where I was really looking for. It was about this non-correspondence. This is the kind of drawing that usually you make at school, the sfumato, the shadow coming from a side. Takes a long time to make, but those were really made almost like in a kind of tribal way of kind of searching a moment, searching this kind of breath of the drawing itself, and then it's kind of when I get tired, also they stop and they become they reveal themselves. This is a little detail. There is just a little video here. Here in this video, when the surface is touched, the touch comes back to you, kind of responds to you. It comes back, it erases itself. It stays for a little while, but then it kind of comes back to you. It's kind of a deformation also of the reflexes you can see, and there is no mark making. It's kind of almost frustrating, this impossibility of kind of leaving a trace. This trace is kind of always, the shape always goes back to where it was in the beginning. Although there is no drawing, there is kind of this frustration of trying the drawing as well. Beginning some of the works, I would like to think that it's only my body could make them, but it's also, I've also worked with other bodies. For me, the artist being in the work, it's not that important. started to make video at the moment and also performing at the moment where I thought that drawing was no longer possible, where it couldn't convey, I couldn't make a drawing of a kind of an experience. And in my practice, video and performance always comes when there is something that is happening and it could not be transformed into or represented into a drawing. Performance always came in moments that were more private. In the studio, I was not really studied or wanted to become a performer. It was really hard, the first performance. I thought, this is not me, why am I going to be there, present? But I'm nervous 5 minutes before, I was nervous 5 minutes before, but when I get in, it really transforms into something else. It's really something completely different. It's no longer an artist that it's there, it's only a body, it's only an experience, and it's the work that it kind of makes itself to our eyes. And this, just to give you a little insight, in this was a site-specific video. It first started as a site-specific, and it's these kind of screens that you have on the windows to block the sunlight, and it was placed on the wall, and there was this bubble, this very large bubble that was there, and then we were kind of taking it out and putting it again, and at a moment I said, no, let's leave it, this one, we'll leave it like this, and I want to do something with it, and it's really this, there's kind of a glue behind this kind of screen, so it glues to the window, and then it comes back to you. And it really started more as kind of a site-specific a piece, although it was not performed, it was filmed, because the light to perform it was not the best one, and it was it just happened also like this. It was a moment that was going to disappear anyway, so it became this piece. I can accelerate to the end. If I learned the lesson. This is the opposite, is almost the negative of the other drawing. Instead of hiding the image is here, it's visible, so I see what I'm doing, and it's kind of a out of control kind of drawing. There is the graphite that I can see. It's really kind of stones, little stones of graphite. It's like broken sticks of graphite, and I try to kind of make a movement that it's kind of regular, and there is the graphite always goes all over the place. It's really kind of a noisy, it's really almost like a sound piece, and here it makes kind of something that it's out of control, but at the same time I like this idea of being out of control and what it represents. It's really something that it's kind of it makes sense. It has its own movements. This is the protections around those drawings where the graphite would come and have this kind of impacts that I tend to keep. I really like this idea of the sides, the left side and the right side of a drawing. Sometimes I draw on the wall, and I always like to keep the sides of the drawing, because it's where the drawing goes away. I need to cut these stripes to send it to an exhibition, but then I'm left with this kind of two stripes, the left side and the right side, the opposite sides, and then I close this space. I really like the idea of the drawing is no longer there. We no longer have the space of the drawing, and then by closing this space, and then I make a third kind of movement, more three-dimensional movement, to kind of hold these two spaces together. Is kind of absence of drawing, but it's funny that they no longer relate to some of these drawings. I don't know which drawing came out of it before they become something independent. like this one. This is also intervention with tape that I use in most of the production of the drawings. For here, it was for a site-specific that I did in Belgium. And I used the tape to protect the edges and to control the image that I wanted to convey. And then when I took the tape away from it, it's really hard to kind of discard everything that goes around the drawing. It's really, for me, it's as important as the drawing itself. And this tape, firstly, they made a white mark on the other drawing, so it's kind of part of it. I work a lot with the leftovers also, the materiality, the tool itself. This is really just when you can't draw anymore because the graphite goes so small that it slips out of your hand and it bugs you, it hurts your fingers because it's no longer practical. I just throw them away to a corner in the studio, and at some point there is kind of this moment in the studio where the works go to the exhibition, but there is kind of a second approach to what's left over or not, and what becomes a piece, like this work here also, where I had to kind of create a device where I made the graphite turn so that I could cut it more easily into squares, because it's really hard to cut graphite with your bare hands, so I needed to create this kind of device to cut it. And when I cut it, you have here the color of the graphite, that it's mostly this one that we see in the market, in the stores, but then there is this black that was kind of impossible. It was a black where it shows that the graphite breaks, and I really like this kind of contrast. These pieces are kind of all united together. By uniting them, there is kind of this hive kind of image. It looks like we think of bees, but it's really also because of the structure they have, kind of go together when they are cut, although they are made like this, very, very long. This is also works from graphite factories, and it's their own leftovers. I was working with going to a factory and working with this kind of their own leftovers, and I installed them like this, almost like mouth, but they look like an open mouth, but it's really just two pieces of graphite put together, and there is no other intervention on it. They're usually installed at the size of a possible mouth itself. It's kind of a very figurative drawing, but to me it really talks also about this idea of the presence of the breathing in the drawing, this kind of open space, the inside and the outside. And I also like this idea of the tool. It's supposed to make drawings. It's here kind of still. My hands are often present. This kind of graphite gets into your hands, and I like this. There is really important when I fold the paper, the white paper. It marks because I wash my hands, and these marks are not visible when you fold the paper. And I decided to fold the paper while cleaning my hands on it. And it's a piece that it's installed. When you see it like this, it looks like just bidimensional, two lines on the wall, but it's a three-dimensional piece like this. And this is also a series I did. It really started as a game, throwing airplanes to my kids while I was working, probably feeling very guilty because I was working on a weekend and they were trying to play with me and throwing me planes, so I threw the planes back. The planes got all kind of marked, and sometimes we had to remake the drawings. Of course, their hands became quite graffiti at the end as well. So the house, and for me it was really important, this idea of it became a piece when I understood that these drawings kind of crossed the spaces and the living room and went from a place to another, and it was really important to try to make this present. We're going to try to show a little. here I did bigger ones. Here I was really kind of experimenting in a space of exhibition. I've decided to film it. This is not a piece. It's just kind of a document. It was used for me to work also over it with for other projects. There is no sound effect. The sound is really amazing. This space really reflected kind of. So I'll go a little bit faster on some of the works. Here is kind of a drawing, really large. That becomes a sculpture, a large sculpture where I have this perfect surface made with line that you don't want to touch, but I felt that I really wanted to take this kind of space. I call this series Embrace, and it's really a moment where I kind of embrace my space of action. All those space of action on drawing could kind of be your table, could be anything else, but I would like to think that this was my space of action. And this is the same work with different views. Some of the performance works become, after they become objects, kind of objects. This one is a folding. It's a line drawing, but it's also folded. I like this idea of the a great percentage of this drawing is not seen, but we know that it's there. It works for this one as well. It's a larger piece with a kind of a line drawing. I can't really project what's when these foldings are made. It really happens. It's not something that I kind of try to design. They really go sometimes places that I don't. I feel that they shouldn't go, but then the paper decides. This is paper sharpening, pencil sharpens. Also, it's bits of wood with a little bit of the coloring pencils, and I've kind of united these elements, and I always make kind of a site-specific, and the works afterwards travels. There were two windows on top of these squares, and I kind of made a reflection of them, like precise, and so it's kind of a connection with the architecture of the building, but then it travels. It's carefully measured, and it travels like this elsewhere. The same here. There were some lines on the floor, and that kind of defined this shape, but this shape afterwards it kind of brings and takes the memory of its pencil sharpenings. Here it's wall drawing that I did in my studio, and then I moved studios, and I said, why have I done this wall drawing? And I would never be able to take it. But at some point I said, oh, probably I can if I scrap the paint really slowly it will come a big surface, but not at all. When I was scrapping it, it just fell into pieces. And I was stubborn, and I've decided to kind of take it all. And now when I go to a studio, there is kind of moments of relaxation, and I make a line drawing, and I always bring it with me, or try to take it out of the wall. This is another piece. It's a series of three works. It's this kind of horizontal line, vertical line, and diagonal line. And it's a line on the wall, but it's made with matches, burnt matches, like this. And they have to touch one side, and they go to the other side of the wall. So the diagonal has to go from one corner to another corner, and the vertical line has to go from top to bottom. And they are always, they have no size. It's a piece that has no size. We could even install one in this wall, very small, or in a very large wall. Some devices that I use to clean my hands, and I always kind of keep them in my studio. This is also kind of almost, it shows the movements in the studio, kind of, there is kind of performative kind of element to it, and it really shows how the movements are important in the studio. So it's a large piece that really takes the floor, and it's put on this round surface, shown like this. It's another piece, folder ones. This is a series of drawings. Some of them are wall drawings on the wall, and some panels. So this is drawing on paper as well. They're really installed as they are installed in my studio to save space, because when you have 20 drawings like this that measure 160 high, and they're quite large in the studio on the floor, it's kind of a mess. So I tend to put them on the wall, and I save all the space. I can kind of continue working, and that's the way of kind of I decide also to install them. This is also sometimes issued, they came from performance drawings, and I kind of organize them in such a way at the studio that they kind of become something else. Although they have different stories, different movements, you can kind of feel in the paper, but then they build this kind of a stack. It's very also on paper. These kind of foldings, they are usually made in the exhibition. I usually travel with these drawings just rolled in a tube, and then I build this. They are pre-folded to make like a straight kind of object. It's also pencil on paper, and then on the space, kind of reacting to the space, I make the foldings, and some of the foldings don't go where I want, and they also create different shapes, and there is always a way that it's kind of a piece that it's self-contained, so it's really the weight, it's really defined also by the piece itself. Of course, once it's done, it's transported, and it has an existence on its own, like this. For example, this one, it could be something large like this. Started using concrete because I like this idea of the concrete being almost like a gray matter. And if you think of this kind of, it's very strong. It's also like a mineral. It's structural. It's made to be strong. But at some point of the construction, it flows. It's like it's fluid. It's a mix, and then it's a fluid, and then it dries, and then it becomes something solid. And I really like to relate it with the idea also of drawing. I'm going faster to leave some space to some questions. And this is also extracts from floor drawings. So it's kind of the action that happens in the studio. There is the presence of some foldings in here, and with some glue, on museum board I can transfer these kind of elements of the several drawings, the process of several drawings, probably sometimes 2 exhibitions or only one, and I can put them together in this is kind of a good example of this idea of a blind drawing. This was a kind of a cube. It was a cube with graphite inside, and this is kind of become something else, something that I have kind of put myself in the place of a spectator, because I don't know exactly what's going to be at the end. There is also this kind of intervention on paper as kind of a material. We have this idea that paper is really fragile, that even a child could come and tear it apart. But when you work it on the way of the strength of the paper, it can really be amazed how it talks to you about different kind of layers, and from not just being a support for a drawing. This drawing was made like an object, and it's made from the inside as well. I've worked with a dancer, a contemporary dancer, where we put together 7 of my drawings and 7 of his kind of cut-ups of his dances. And what we did was he was just brought a few moments of that dance, and I brought moments of the folding and the process of some of the performances. For example, here it's really just the position. I'm in a position where I am often in my studio to fold really large sheets of paper, and so we decided to kind of put this together. This was the first time we worked together, and we decided to kind of create a dialogue during this presentation. And I don't think we have time for the video, but I still would like to show you this kind of series where we're really probably very far away from drawing here, and although it's really closer and closer to my practice, and it's we're not going to see it entirely. I'm just going to show you a few. So I'm going to leave it here, maybe leaving some space for some questions, if you have. I'll be more than pleased to answer. I know it's always a very awkward, hard moment, but don't hesitate. It's the moment. Yes.
Series. Can you explain the process a little bit more?
Yeah, the circle is you just get this idea of kind of a screen. There's a rectangular shape. There is a paper folded into a structure, wooden structure, like a stretch bar, it could be. And then you have this kind of, I'm not looking at it as like a surface, I'm really looking more at this kind of a bouncy, it looks almost like a drum. and I start to kind of listen to these kind of elements of the paper. What I do is I just tape some plastic. So it could be that garbage bin there, plastic, or the top. I would just cut the end and then put it there because it's probably a little bit too heavy, that one. And then I just tape it, but before taping it all around it, I just put graphite inside, like really bits, just broken bits of graphite. I was really expecting something else when I did it. I was expecting something that was close to probably I was looking for, but I was really I really wanted to know how by not watching the drawing, by not seeing it, how could it be real or stay close to something that it was more real to the gesture than to something that you are really actually controlling or thinking that you are kind of controlling. So it was just by putting myself out of that kind of equation of controlling and seeing and making decisions with my eyes, I was really doing something else. It becomes almost like universal. It looks like it's very atmospheric. It looks like a universe, like shape, or the shape of the earth, and it's. I was very happy, although I have not much to say or to. As of course it was me, but it can be you making it. If you make it, hope the result will be the same. So there is no this idea of like precision of the hand, and so I like the how they really talk about being real with such a. Different movements and correspondence. Did you? Yeah.
Have you tried using pigments such as graphite or similar?
I tend to reduce the palette. I really tend to be very, very minimal in that kind of approach. It's really mark making. I'm not being entirely truth because there is still a lot to say. There's still a lot to say about graphite. Graphite is it's kind of a universe. There is really going through the HB. There is today even soluble graphite, and there is a way of the tool, the way I cut the tool. There is kind of the palette is kind of there, but I tend to be getting really close to the very simplistic way of. I wouldn't say simplistic, but a simple way of mark making and being very, into this tool that it's used for drawing, for schools, for writing, for language, and that's where I kind of position myself.
I'm curious about the installation of your work because you're using a material which is like really messy, and the installation is always really clean outside of the work itself. So I'm curious, like, do you work with, I'm sure, like professional installation crew so that it's like perfectly white around the messy paper? Messy, I mean, covered in marks.
I see. Yeah. No, it's very. It comes very natural, and of course, in my studio, I really have to be organized, and otherwise, it's like going into a mine, a graphite mine. So it can be complicated, but I like to something that might help explaining why things appear neat like that. I really like to clean my studio after every show. There is a show, and then there is a piece, and I think that it was too messy. I have to clean it back. I don't really use much of the interference from one show to another. Although sometimes it really slides one show to another, but it's a pertinent question because it's really messy. Even the drawings that really take all the mess together from weeks and weeks of work, and it's installed on the wall. I think it's important for the mess to be neat because it's not about that. It's not really about that component or even about the mineral that it's dusty. It's really not. It doesn't really go in that kind of direction. So I think it's neat also because it conveys something that I like to think that it's kind of, I like to believe that it's very natural. If I always believe that the artist, we can be there 80%, sometimes 90%, some of the artists 99%, even 110%. And I like to think that it's not really always like that. It's sometimes we are 30% there. There in the drawing, in the presence of the production, in the piece itself, in the final result. And as an artist, as the creator, as the producer, whatever you want to call it. And I think that sometimes I'm really there, just 2%. There is something that I try to make it naturally. I want it to kind of happen. Of course, I assume sometimes I'm really there like 90%, and I think probably there is this thinking, there is a messy kind of material, but the approach, I like to think that it's not messy. It's, you know what I mean? It goes through pinpoint and natural movement, the moment, and that's why they come out so clean. Thankfully, because the studio is already quite dark sometimes. But it was there was this gallerist who told me, a gallery close to another gallery, saw me. It's amazing. There was graphite in my gallery, 2 blocks away from. So, and he was not pissed. He was like, he said, "Oh, it's so interesting that your show continues. It kind of goes." And it was funny. I like this idea of the movement and how it's. Although when you saw the exhibition was not messy at all, it was really neat, and also because when you have plenty of graphite on a piece of paper, but then you decided to fold it, and then I want to force it here, and then the paper just moves when you force it there. What's happening here? It's going this way. Why? So you kind of convey things in such a way that you're not really forcing what it's messy, and the messier works, this kind of paper it's really completely destroyed, or some of the works where I really put the paper over me and I get inside and I have to come out and then I force it to be there. It's quite messy when you think about it, and I get all marked, all graffiti, but then the piece itself, it's there kind of in a moment, this idea of movement. I like to work in that kind of impossibility of movement or happening. It's kind of knowledge in action. I really like to believe that it's kind of this idea of action. It's a pertinent question. I'm glad you asked it. Nobody ever asked it before.
Yeah, I just asked because anytime I make anything, like my fingerprints are left everywhere, and
yeah,
just cannot not paint a mess.
Yeah, maybe separate things, or there's something there, but it's. I totally know what you mean, but it's really just even the scotch, the tape. When I use the tape, it's messy at the studio, and it's really hard to keep them straight when you take them out, they really get all rolled up, and then. But if you kind of take care of things and then, apprivoiser, you really kind of make them, give them a different. Existence, more like a neat existence. But I started painting when I was like really even before school, and I couldn't stand the brush cleaning, and it was so messy. But sometimes your body talks about, maybe the painters will tell me that graphite, powder, how can you? It's sometimes it's kind of a material where also you kind of feel at ease, and that's really important. Also that it would have been messy. I would not work with it. My OCD kind of side would definitely stay out of it, and it doesn't. It kind of approaches it in this simple way. I think you were saying.
No, it's on a really banal level, but isn't it dangerous inhaling?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. It's a heavy. Yeah, I've done a little research. It can be even the lead. There is some lead on it, but it's also a heavy material. Dust stays in the air.
Yeah.
The graphite powder, although you see it everywhere because it's mark making and it's in your hands, and sometimes it
goes on the floor, and when you walk you see it because you kind of press it to the floor. It's there, you don't see it, but when you mark it, it becomes something. And it's that's not such a bad thing, like the gas of paint, or it doesn't really stay. It goes down quite quickly. Although it's good to have a protection, on some of the pieces, of course, on some of the works.
But it doesn't look cool if you're doing a performance with it.
No, that's it. That's why they tend to be covered and inside and blind drawing. Yeah, it's really this idea of kind of the movement in itself, so this idea of mineral, the particles. It's not much my theme, but of course it's you need to kind of know.
Maybe that's related also to, it struck me how much the work's about endurance and kind of and like strict physical. You say I stop when I'm exhausted, and there's like I was wondering if there's like pleasure in there, or whether it's about this kind of, because even I know to get the surfaces that black, that is a hell of a lot of physical.
It is and it is not. For some of them it can be, but it's quite physical. You're no longer drawing like this. That would be immense and a big task. But when I'm working with it, I'm really going full force, and I treat it as I put all my weight. Like I said, paper is really fragile, but it's also something that it's really strong. I hope I can. Like when you see paper, it's really something so fragile. It flies with the wind, but you make it just a little folding, like this. This experiment will work. Yeah, it did. So it becomes something different and stronger. And I really tend to work drawing more in this kind of capacity. So when I draw on this surface, it's no longer drawing on this very delicate piece of paper, although it's the same. We're talking about the exact same. So I really approach it with a lot of like weight and strength. It's more. If you see me work, sometimes it's really more as if I was sculpting, and these movements of some of the performances. It's really about like going on the floor and going there. And this is really, for me, was really important that it's about the weight put into it also. It's not really about the detail and making it drawing till I would be very, very tired. I'm like that. If I don't see results, I kind of course, some of the drawings are very, there's kind of a meditation kind of modes also in my practice. You also find that, but that's not when you're tired or you want to it's kind of an escape. When you're doing those kind of drawings, it's more, you're in your comfort zone. You're repeating a gesture, you're going really minimal, but that's really important. It's important to feel comfortable in your practice. I think it's really important. But it's very tiring, yes. Sometimes it's really tiring. Sometimes the body needs the proper rest. And but sorry.
Yes. So when I see some of your pieces, I think about weight. Sometimes I just don't think that it's paper anymore. And sometimes I even make a comparison with the Hushapsh. They are very heavy, those pieces. And my question is, it's not easy to preserve paper. So you were showing the pieces called enriches. What happens with the preservation? Because it's not an easy task and
Yes.
paper it can get humidity, for instance. It can get destroyed. How do these pieces survive? Is time an important element in your production?
It is, of course it is. I like to believe that we have Dürer and Piranesi drawings, so they were really fragile as well. And I like to believe that my drawings with triple coats of graphite, with all this weight, will kind of course, sometimes the choice of the paper itself, it's a response to that. We're sometimes really talking about a more consistent paper, pH neutral. It's
it's also protected, spray protected. Sometimes there is even an underlayer also of protection so that the paper really absorbs the graphite. And there is sometimes for the more fragile paper, I treat it with gesso as well, almost like a canvas, but it's not as fragile as we think. But there is, of course, a preservation, and but if you leave it and you treat it well, it will not it's not self-destroyable. It's still a drawing on paper, and we have in a lot of museums from centuries ago drawings that are preserved. Maybe I can't imagine one of my drawings being in a very low light, and in years to come I like to think that it's of course some natural kind of transformation also, but don't bring it to the rain or to, yes, it has to be certain. But it's important, yes, always important to think about this preservation, although it's also important to sometimes consider it as ephemeral as well. Also, there is kind of this idea. Of course, it won't last. It will last some years, but maybe not 500, or unless you really it still means something to somebody, or if it's taking good care. So the preservation also goes with the belief that somebody will take care of it.
But they seem more eternal than what they are.
Sorry?
They seem more eternal.
Yes,
They my belief. Sometimes I see and I see like an iron piece, but it's not.
Yes, they really convey this fragility and strength completely, yes. They're really light, they're really easy to transport, although they really are, like when you draw with graphite, you start drawing, it's white and then dark, but then when you draw more over it, it's the graphite that you see. You start seeing the graphite, but you start seeing the paper as well, because the paper starts to appear a lot more than just a white surface that you are supposed to do something on it. So it's more, the paper is a lot more invisible sometimes when you want to draw on it, when you want to draw something on it. It really becomes invisible, it's kind of a surface, a screen, whatever. You're looking more inside than outside. And there is some works that when I use the concrete, I have concrete on the wall, but the concrete is holding the paper. No, the paper is holding the concrete against the wall. It's not the other way around. If I give you concrete and then paper, you will never lean it against the wall. First the paper and then the concrete. It doesn't make sense. And in those pieces, it really talks about this unknown strength also of the paper. So the paper is in a way at a certain height, but it's held by the concrete. So it's the paper is holding the concrete, and the concrete is holding. So this, of course, I'm conscious. I'm conscious of this kind of strength and fragility that it refers to. Yes, completely. It's really important.
I think there's one more question. We might take one more and then.
Of course.
With the interactive table,
Mm-hmm.
and the sizes,
Yes.
was that a recorded sound by someone, or was it just something that was created through the movement of the pen?
No, it's a recording.
That was a recording.
It's a voice recording by someone who really goes on to the A letter, and it goes all the possibilities phonetically speaking of them for the A. So there's A, and of course it changes from language to language. This one was as a French phonetics. Yeah. There's this last little thing, and I was started really tired in the beginning, and waking up at 5 didn't really help. But also a moment that was really important for me was when my grandmother and I was near a fire, and she asked me, do you think we can grasp a braise, burning braise? And it was there shining like right, really wrong, and of course I would burn my fingers. And I thought this is not a tricky question because it's impossible. Come on, it's there, it's burning glue. And she told me, no, it's possible. She took one really quick, she put it in the other hand really quick, and then she moved from one hand to another. And for me, this is also kind of, it really works about the practice of drawing and how you can kind of, in a kind of impossibility, evident impossibility, how the movement kind of helps you holding things. Is she really holding it? Because when I saw her, I'm cheating, you're not really holding it. But she had it. And I just wanted to share this little story also again with you, and because it really talks about this kind of idea of fragility and how movement comes and kind of conveys what, and kind of touches what's strong, what's fragile, and for me it's really about drawing, strange as it might seem. But thank you so much for taking all this time.